in general, not a lot of replication going on in the field of education.
Yeah, and there's a couple reasons why that is, actually. And one of them is that, especially in computer science education, it sounds really weird to say, but we actually have no evidence standard. Now, what does that mean? Well, actually, it turns out there's a formal thing called an evidence standard. It's not like a term I'm making up. It's like a standard term, evidence standard. And what it means is that when you publish papers, there's certain protocols you follow for how you report experiments. Now, think about this. If I'm in the medical journals, they actually follow one called CONSORT, CONSORT. CONSORT is a medical standard that you have to follow if you publish at certain journals. And it basically means that you have a replication packet. You have certain things you report. You report demographics. You report how the study was done, that kind of stuff. And the reason that matters is because anybody that wants to replicate it really needs that information and able to do it. In education, there is a evidence standard called the What Works Clearinghouse. It's much more complicated, and that's a whole other topic of discussion. But it's not really the same. And when you talk about computer science journals, the evidence standard they use is nothing. People just kind of publish whatever they want. So if you want to replicate other people's work, sometimes it's almost impossible because you really don't have the information you need, let alone like a replication packet and stuff like that. So it makes it really tough because our journals haven't kind of gotten on the bandwagon yet for evidence standards, and therefore we're really behind.
Yeah, and I've done some reviews for the Department of Ed and then applied for some grants that required What Works Clearinghouse. And the problem that we were running into was there weren't any studies related to CS education that we could cite. So what we ended up doing was saying, well, here's some professional development stuff that's in alignment with what we're doing, but it's in a different content area. So it's kind of like this, but not really.
I 100% understand exactly what you're saying. That's completely true. Because we don't follow the standards, then it is what it is. And it's tricky too. Computer science education is also an international community. It's not just Americans. But the What Works Clearinghouse only covers Americans. So it's sort of funny, like we almost, in a way, want like an international evidence standard that covers everybody. Because like, are the kids in Finland the same as the United States? Maybe, but like, maybe not. And in fact, there's some evidence to suggest that that's not true. There's a woman named Felina Hermans that does really fantastic computer science education work. I think she's in the Netherlands, and like they speak a different language. And the programming languages are in English. What are the challenges there? Well, they're not zero, right? They're complicated.
Right.
But yet that's not going to make it into the What Works Clearinghouse, even if it's solid work.
Right. Yeah, hopefully in a couple of years that'll change. But
I hope so too. Yeah.
For now, it's just frustrating.
It is frustrating, right? Well, plus, like, it's so much easier to read studies that are in an evidence standard. Like, you look up a study on PubMed that follows CONSORT, you know where everything is. Like, oh, you want to look at demographics? Well, it's in the section with that exact name every single time. There's no debate. It's just simple.
Yeah, for my dissertation, I tried to make it as replicable as possible. So it was a corpus-assisted discourse analysis. So I looked at like 11 million words of data and tried to find patterns of discourse. And then what does this mean for education? So like in my methods chapter, in chapter 3, it was just all about, okay, if somebody else wanted to be able to redo this study, what do I need to include in there? So I was very conscious of that. So hopefully people could redo it if they wanted to.
Oh, that's lovely. 10 years ago, we had replication packets, but they were all kind of like, we didn't really know what they should be and stuff. Nowadays, replication packets are download this on GitHub, add humans, right?
Right.
And so it's a lot, at least theoretically, a lot easier to sort of replicate the studies. Now, does anybody actually replicate our studies? I kind of doubt it, but it's possible. And that's the first step.
Yeah, then there's also the issue of, well, what counts in terms of publication and for the institutions that you're at? Like, are you going to get as many citations if you're the one doing the follow-up study or if you're doing the initial study that people are then going to try and replicate?
That's a good point. I mean, like we obsess about these ridiculous things like H-index and citation count.
Right.
I mean, they're not totally dumb. Like we do care about it to an extent of like, you want your work to be used by other people, but it misses two fundamental things, like these kind of weird metrics that we're obsessed with in academia. Number one is all the metrics related to citation counts and paper writing and stuff, they usually emphasize that you should be writing, right? Like your H-index. How do you get your H-index up? You write more papers, and then you write papers in popular areas. That's it, right? That's the most likely way to do it. So pick a big community and then write lots of papers to that community to increase your H-index. However, we forget that as computer scientists, we also can invent things, and that has value. So for example, we invented this programming language called Quorum, and it's used last year by I think like 81,000 people. Right now, that's a metric. But at the same time, like if I spend time writing that application, I'm actually not spending time writing, which might look bad from other academics' perspective. But honestly, I don't care, because I think that has more tangible impact on society than just obsessively working on writing only. So it feels like we need, as a culture of academics, we need a better balance as to like how we think about what we choose to do in our own jobs. So.
Well, and it rewards and kind of punishes some approaches over others. So, for instance, survey, really easy to send that stuff out and to get data back, but doing a longitudinal ethnographic study on a particular culture or set of people or whatever, that's going to take much more time, and it might be multiple years until you can actually start publishing on the actual findings from those kind of studies.
Well, 100%. The first big study that we did on programming language design was in 2013. And it took my student and I 4 years to put that study together. Now, like, that's not woe is me. It took a long time. That's because we wanted to know the answer.
Right.
Does that mean that like I could have been doing smaller studies or split them up into like little mini papers? And like, it's just so stupid. It's just a waste of time. It's easier for the research community if we have one resource that's well vetted over a long period of time than lots of little mini pubs that get tossed out all the time. This is sort of, I don't know, I just feel like we waste, because we're so obsessed with these metrics, it also wastes our time, because we end up reading like the next increment on the same paper, which is like, you know, a 3% improvement on this algorithm or something, instead of like waiting a couple years and getting a big foundational advance.
You can listen to this full interview as well as hundreds more by searching for the CSK8 podcast on your favorite podcast app, or by simply going to jaredoleary.com.